Hey there, writers, and welcome to episode number 81 of the Well-Storied podcast. My name is Kristen Kiefer, and this podcast is where I translate articles from the Well-Storied blog into audio so you can listen in on the go. If you don't know, Well-Storied is where I help writers craft sensational novels and build their very best writing lives. And today we are in the thick of our series on editing here on the podcast. In fact, today we are diving back into the blog archives to update and reshare an article on editing and revising that I think you're going to enjoy. It's called What's the Difference Between Editing and Revising, and How Can You Accomplish Both? I do recommend going ahead and checking out the transcript, the article that goes along with today's episode of the podcast. We're going to cover very briefly a lot of editing and revising topics, but I've linked a ton of articles for you that will explain these topics in further detail. So if you're listening to today's episode and feeling like you want more information about what we're talking about, make sure to head on over to today's transcript at well-storied.com/difference, and you can find all of those links. Okay? Now let's get started. What is the difference between editing and revising, and how can you accomplish both? Before we can begin polishing our manuscripts, there's something we need to discuss: the difference between editing and revising. These two words are often used interchangeably, and that's fine for colloquial conversations. But when it comes to the work itself, these words indicate two unique tasks. Understanding the differences between the two can help you cut through editing overwhelm, see, there's that colloquial usage again, and make the process of finishing your manuscript far more efficient. So, what is the difference between editing and revising? And what exactly is involved in accomplishing both tasks? Let's break down these questions in today's episode, writer. What does the revision process look like? To revise your novel is to change or strengthen its storytelling. I always recommend that writers tackle revisions first and separate from editing, the altering of a story's prose, as there's not much use in worrying over sentence structure or grammar when you may delete the entire scene. When tackling revisions, here are some elements every writer should consider. First up, and these are really in no particular order, but still, first up, plot holes. When revising, writers should work to both strengthen the positive elements of their story and to cut or alter that which isn't working. One of the first elements writers should seek out is plot holes, gaps or logical fallacies in a storyline. Most readers can suspend their disbelief in small measure for the sake of an enjoyable story, but large inconsistencies and illogical events are likely to disappoint. For more information on how to find and fix your story's plot holes, make sure to check out the link in today's episode transcript. Next up, story structure. Whether consciously or unconsciously considered, most successful stories operate on the framework of an established story structure. Reconsidering the structure of your own story as you begin revisions can help you strengthen your story's hook, increase tension, improve character development, smooth pacing, refine your story's themes, and even root out those pesky plot holes we talked about a moment ago. Next up, purpose. Everything in your novel should serve a purpose, whether it strengthens the plot, develops characters, lends to the story's themes, or adds rich and vital context to the world building. Without purpose, story elements serve only as filler, weighing down your story's pace and perhaps adding to readers' overwhelm, confusion, or boredom. As you revise, keep an eye out for these extraneous elements, especially those you're resistant to removing from your manuscript. These latter elements are known as darlings, and though they can be tough to kill, most stories benefit from their authors doing so. If you're finding the process tough, however, again, check out the link I've shared with you in today's episode transcript. Next, let's consider character arcs. Characters are the backbone of pretty much any good story, whether or not that book is character-driven. Even in stories driven by plot, character arcs serve as the emotional undercurrent that pulls readers along on your characters' journeys. As you consider the work you'll complete during revisions, don't forget to take a second look at your major characters' core internal struggles and the arcs of events that see them wrestling with those struggles throughout your story, making changes as necessary. Next up, exposition. Exposition consists of the knowledge readers must possess to fully understand the dynamics of your story, including elements such as setting, character relationships, backstory, and history. Because we don't possess the objectivity of our readers, it can be all too easy to omit necessary details, to reveal far more information than is necessary, or to share information in infodumps that leaves readers feeling winded. That's why it's important to find a healthy expositional balance during revisions. On to pacing, writers. When it comes to the flow of your story, what matters most is not whether you've set a galloping pace or a meandering one, but that the pace you've chosen remains consistent as the plot progresses. Taking care to consider your story's structure can work wonders for you in this regard. For additional guidance, I've linked another article for you in today's episode transcript. Now let's talk about foreshadowing. Foreshadowing hints at events to come and can serve as a powerful tool in a writer's arsenal, helping them develop tension and establish or subvert readers' expectations. Making use of this tool can be difficult during the writing process, however, especially for those who prefer to discovery draft their stories. But with your first draft complete, revisions become the perfect time to weave a little carefully considered foreshadowing into the heart of your story. And finally, let's talk about accuracy and continuity when it comes to revising your manuscript. As you work through revisions, don't forget to consider the accuracy and continuity of the facts you've included in your story. Most characters' eyes shouldn't shift colors between chapters, nor should Cuba be listed as an island in the Pacific Ocean, and so on. Many professional copy editors will seek out such mistakes when working on your manuscript, but it certainly doesn't hurt to put in the work yourself. Depending on the nature of your novel, you may want to double or even triple check the facts you've included as a result of your research as well. Now, what does the editing process look like? As we mentioned earlier, editing specifically consists of altering and strengthening your story's prose, the actual writing itself. In professional circles, there are two common types of editing: line edits and copy edits. The former consists of tweaking prose for clarity and style, while the latter focuses on improving the accuracy and, for lack of a better word, the readability of the prose. When diving into edits, here are the common elements you'll want to consider. Firstly, sentence structure. There is an incredible amount of power in the structuring of sentences. Too many similar sentences in a row can make a story feel stilted and awkward, while varied sentence structure more closely mimics a natural storytelling voice. On occasion, however, making use of repeated sentence structure can work to achieve the particular mood a writer is trying to convey, typically one of suspense or dissatisfaction. When editing your own work, consider sentence structure carefully to create an easy flow or to purposefully disrupt it. Next up, point of view and voice. When crafting prose, understanding whose voice is telling the story is essential. Whether it's a character or an external narrator, allowing that voice to permeate your writing style is key to crafting a novel that is both personal and original. Understanding voice will affect many aspects of your writing style, including word choice, tone, and the sentence structure we talked about a moment ago, all of which should be considered during the editing process. Next up in our editing checklist is description. Whether of setting, appearance, or some other contextual information, description can be a pain point for many writers. Too heavy-handed of descriptions can leave readers feeling bored or overwhelmed, while a lack of description can leave them afloat instead. When editing your own story's descriptions, work to do so in a way that sees the characters interacting with what is being described. Make use of their senses and their points of view, allowing description to also lend itself to character development and action. This, I've found, is one of the surest ways to craft description that's both enjoyable to read and that fulfills its purpose, and it's one of the biggest tasks I personally tackled during the editing process. For more tips on writing description, again, I've linked an article for you in today's episode transcript. Next up, we need to talk about clarity. Ensuring your prose is clear and effective is essential to readers' enjoyment of your book. Knowing whether your work is in any way overcomplicated or confusing, however, can be difficult. As the authors of our work, it's often tough to see the forest through the trees. When it comes to editing for clarity, I recommend following the tips in our last episode of the podcast, episode number 80, for employing your best objective eye. Or, if you're planning to self-publish, to hire a copy editor to complete this work for you. If you're publishing traditionally, your manuscript will be assigned a copy editor. And finally, proofreading. When a manuscript has been revised and edited, there remains one final step to its completion. Proofreading. Such work finds and corrects mistakes in spelling, grammar, and formatting, the latter of which includes proper capitalization, punctuation, and the like. In most cases, it's helpful to hire a proofreader to complete this work for you. As you copy edit your book, however, it doesn't hurt to check for consistent verb tense, noun-verb agreements, unnecessary modifiers, and other common mistakes. Now, we've talked about revising, we've talked about editing, but there may be one question on your mind. How many drafts should all of this take? Well, every writer's process is a little different. How you go about revising and editing your manuscript may vary greatly from others' choices. I do recommend completing revisions before moving on to editing, however, as I mentioned earlier in our episode. Doing so will save you quite a bit of time and effort, as there's no point in editing scenes you may rewrite or delete later. When it comes to the number of drafts you complete, however, anything goes. If you'd like to complete a host of small drafts, each addressing a particular revising or editing task, that's a fantastic choice, as is the decision to complete a large amount of work in one fell swoop. The number of drafts it takes to complete your novel your way is the right number of drafts. But how do you know when to stop revising or editing? No novel is ever as perfect as the version inside the writer's head. But when big picture changes turn into tiny little nitpicks, you'll know it's time to consider your manuscript complete. Congratulations, writer! You've written, revised, and edited your very own book. Thanks so much for listening into this episode of the podcast, writers. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the differences between revising and editing and all of the tasks that go into both. There is certainly a lot to consider, as you can tell, but all of the hard work is worth it in the end when you produce such a fantastic story, really taking what was a good story, hopefully to begin with, and turning it into something great, something your readers will love. If you enjoyed these tips, don't forget to go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. We're now available on YouTube, SoundCloud, the iTunes podcast app, and on the well-storied website. And it would also mean a lot to me if you could give the podcast a quick rating and review, as doing so helps increase its visibility and reach new readers. I would also like to take a quick moment to thank well-storied's patrons. Their small monthly donations over on Patreon go a long way toward helping me cover all the expenses involved in the free resources I create at well-storied, including this podcast. And so it really means a lot to me to have their support behind this podcast and all that I create. If you'd like to become a part of that team, for as little as $1 a month, you can head on over to patreon.com/well-storied and support my work as well. I'll leave that link for you in today's episode description if you're interested. All right, writers, that's all I have for you today. Thank you all so much for listening in, and I can't wait to see you guys next time. Until then, happy writing!